The black plastic card hissed. Rejection clicked, sharp and metallic. The air in the Grand Riviera lobby, already heavy with the opulent perfume of 1,000 Casablanca lilies, grew suddenly still and frigid. It was a scent designed to evoke celebration and luxury, a sweet, creamy fragrance with honeyed undertones that now seemed to mock the scene unfolding. The cool, polished marble floors, a checkerboard of cream and gold, reflected the light of a colossal chandelier that dripped with thousands of hand-cut crystal teardrops, each one a frozen, glittering tear. Across the vast expanse of the lobby, near a stand of imported palms, David Lee, the bellhop, froze, his hand, moments before rhythmically polishing a brass luggage cart, stilled. The soft friction of his cloth against the metal ceased, and the sudden silence from his corner of the room was as profound as the held breath of the wedding guests beginning to trickle in. His uniform, a crisp maroon affair with gold piping, suddenly felt stiff and conspicuous as his attention was snared by the tableau at the gleaming mahogany front desk. Elena Dubois, enveloped in a cream-colored cashmere dress that draped with studied elegance over the prominent swell of her 7-month pregnancy, stared at the offending card. The dress, a whisper-soft armor, did little to protect her from the sudden, icy dread. Her hand, adorned with a simple gold wedding band, flew to her belly, a gentle, instinctive cup over the precious life within. It was a gesture both protective and unconscious, a mother shielding her child from a world that had suddenly turned hostile. The baby, a girl she had already named Hope, shifted within her, a small, fluttering kick that was both a comfort and a sharp reminder of her vulnerability. "Declined," the clerk, a young man with a freshly pressed uniform and a name tag that read, "Javier!" stammered. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat, and his eyes darted from Elena to the card, then to the floor, anywhere but her face. His skin, normally a healthy olive, had paled to a pasty white. He took a nervous breath, steeling himself. From beside her, the jarring jangle of heavy gold bracelets shattered the fragile quiet, as loud and unwelcome as a fire alarm in a library. Camille Jenkins, a slash of scarlet silk against the lobby's opulent golds and creams, let out a sharp, theatrical laugh that was all teeth and no warmth. Her dress was cut low, her nails long and blood red, a stark contrast to Elena's understated elegance. "Oh dear," she purred, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Trouble in paradise?" Marcus Thorne, general manager of the Grand Riviera and the man to whom Elena was still, legally, married, did not deign to look at her. He stood like a monolith carved from obsidian, his dark, impeccably tailored suit a testament to his power and position. He addressed the trembling desk clerk, his voice a low, controlled rumble that nevertheless sliced through the hushed murmur of the arriving wedding guests. "Run it again," he commanded, his words clipped and precise. "Under my personal account." "Of course, Mr. Thorne. Right away, sir." Javier fumbled, his hands shaking slightly as he took the card. Elena's chin, which had momentarily dipped in shock, lifted. Her pride, a stubborn, resilient thing, flared. "That's not necessary, Marcus. There must be a mistake. I'll call the bank." He finally turned. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept over her, not with the warmth of a husband, but with the cold, detached appraisal of a health inspector finding a cockroach in his pristine kitchen. "A mistake?" he repeated, his voice laced with a quiet fury. Yes, a grave one. His gaze dropped with deliberate cruelty to her swollen abdomen, but one we are, for the moment, forced to endure. The air grew heavy with unspoken tension. The ambient chatter in the lobby faltered and died. A dozen conversations, hushed and polite, sputtered into silence. Heads, elegantly coiffed and adorned with jewels, turned in their direction. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. David Lee remained motionless, a statue in a maroon uniform, his hands still resting on the polished brass, his eyes wide, watching. Camille, emboldened by the public nature of the humiliation, sidled closer to Marcus, her red nails tracing the lapel of his suit, a possessive, predatory gesture. "Perhaps she's overextended her allowance, darling," she suggested, her voice a poisonous whisper meant to carry all those cravings. The bracelets clattered again as she gestured vaguely, dismissively, toward Elena's stomach. "I don't have an allowance," Elena said, her voice even, dangerously calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Marcus smiled, a chilling, placid expression that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile he reserved for his enemies just before he crushed them. "You have what I give you," he said, taking a step closer, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. He was a tower of menace, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. "You are what I have made you." Did you really think that little card had any power of its own? It's tied to me, to my name, to my generosity. He leaned in, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that seemed to echo in the cavernous, silent lobby. He paused, letting his words sink in. "A generosity," he continued, savoring each word, "that has reached its limit." He was monologuing now, a performer on his favorite stage. He loved an audience. People come to the Grand Riviera, the flagship of the Dubois Hospitality Group, and they see glamour. They see success. He gestured expansively. A king in his court, his hand sweeping across the opulent space, indicating the marble, the crystal, the very air they breathed. They do not see the sacrifice. They do not see the man who bleeds for this marble, who sweats for this crystal. I am that man. His voice rose, filled with a self-aggrandizing fervor. I took this place from a 3-star failing relic and I forged it into a diamond. Me. Not some trust fund committee, not some invisible board. I decide who belongs here. I decide who is worthy of breathing this refined air. Elena's hand remained on her belly, a shield for her unborn daughter, for hope. She said nothing, her silence a stark, defiant contrast to his bombast. She focused on the feel of the soft cashmere beneath her fingers, the steady, rhythmic beat of her own heart. The silence begged him to continue, and he obliged, his ego swelling to fill the void. "And what have you done?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You were supposed to be an asset." A beautiful, quiet, elegant piece of the decor. He leaned in again, his voice a venomous hiss. "But you became inconvenient. This." He gestured again at her stomach, a flick of his wrist, a gesture of profound disgust. "This whole messy, tedious business, it's a distraction. It's an embarrassment. My executive assistant, Camille," he said with a pointed look at the smirking woman beside him. "She understands the mission. She focuses on what matters, the brand, the bottom line. She doesn't let personal feelings or conditions get in the way." He paused, letting the insult hang in the air, thick and suffocating. "I have curated a world of perfection," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There is no room for your flaws." The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. 3 words: "You must leave." Elena flinched, the first visible break in her carefully constructed composure. "Marcus, what are you talking about? This is my home." "No." The word was a gunshot echoing in the silent lobby. "This is my hotel, and you are a guest whose patronage is no longer welcome." He turned to the 2 security guards who had begun to drift closer, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and professional detachment. "Please escort Miss Dubois off the premises." Camille's smirk was triumphant. She adjusted a gaudy, glittering earring, the picture of victory, her eyes glinting with a cold, cruel light. The guards, 2 burly men in identical black suits, hesitated. They looked from their formidable boss to the very pregnant woman in cream, her face now pale with shock. "Now," Marcus commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. Elena took a single stumbling step back, her heel catching on the edge of a priceless Persian rug. She flailed for a moment, her arms windmilling in the air as she fought for balance. A collective gasp, a wave of shock and pity rippled through the assembled crowd. Her face, which had been a mask of calm defiance, finally shattered into 1,000 pieces of public humiliation. She looked past Marcus, past the smirking mistress in red, and her eyes, filled with a desperate, pleading anguish, met the steady, silent gaze of David Lee, the bellhop, who watched and saw. And remembered everything. Marcus didn't even look back. He simply turned, offering his arm to Camille as if he were a gentleman caller and she his cherished date. "Let's get a drink, my dear," he said, his voice once again smooth and charming. "The wedding party is arriving and I want to be seen." They walked away, a dark suit and a red dress, a portrait of callous indifference, leaving Elena alone in the vast, suddenly silent space. The stares of the strangers were physical blows, each one a fresh wound. She was an exhibit, a scandal, a cautionary tale. Her hand trembled on the precious life within her, the one thing in this world that was truly hers. She was left utterly alone. The lily's opulent perfume clung to her, a suffocating shroud of public humiliation. Desperate to escape the piercing gazes and the weight of unseen judgment, Elena Dubois stumbled backward from the echoing silence of the grand lobby, the abrupt cessation of the furious argument leaving a ringing vacuum in her ears. The glares of the strangers, sharp and inquisitive, felt like physical blows, each speculative, pitying whisper, a fresh, cold tide of shame washing over her. She hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller, less visible, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed to disappear, to find some hidden corner where the opulence couldn't mock her and the silence couldn't scream. She navigated a bewildering maze of hushed conversations and averted gazes, a blur of jewel-toned guests. Their faces were indistinct, yet she imagined every pair of eyes was fixed on her, dissecting her humiliation. The grand hall, a soaring expanse of polished marble floors that chilled her bare ankles, gilded pillars that reached towards a frescoed ceiling, and sparkling crystal chandeliers that cast a dazzling, indifferent light, stretched before her like a golden cage from which there was no escape. She found herself moving by instinct, a primal, desperate need for cover overriding the shock that threatened to paralyze her. her legs, suddenly weak and unsteady on the slick, cold marble, propelled her away from the glittering, unforgiving display of luxury past the enormous stand of imported palms where David Lee had stood, his silent, observing gaze a haunting, unexpected memory. His presence, usually so discreet, had felt intensely personal in that moment of public immolation. She veered sharply to her left, her hand scraping against a cool, lacquered panel before finding an unmarked door. It was heavy, dark, and utterly nondescript. It swung inward with a faint, breathy sigh, a sound barely audible above the frantic hammering of her own heart, revealing a service corridor. The air here was thin, cool, a stark contrast to the cloying warmth of the lobby. It carried the faint metallic tang of industrial cleaner, almost like bleach or strong ammonia, and the distant, muffled thrum of unseen machinery vibrating faintly through the floor. This was a stark, utilitarian world, utterly devoid of embellishment, a brutal reality compared to the gilded facade she had just fled. Rough, unpainted concrete walls, a pale institutional gray, rose on either side, interrupted only by the occasional purely functional service panel or a bright red fire extinguisher mounted starkly on its bracket. The floor, a worn industrial-grade carpet in a muted dark gray, absorbed sound with unremitted efficiency, making her own footsteps eerily quiet, almost non-existent. There was no lingering scent of lilies here, only the sharp, antiseptic smell of duty, function, and a chilling anonymity. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, a definitive, isolating sound that resonated with the finality of her banishment. The silence was profound, broken only by her ragged, desperate breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird beating itself against bone and sinew. Her vision, blurred by hot tears, swam, distorting the corridor into an indistinct haze. She clutched her belly, a fierce protective instinct overriding everything else, her trembling fingers digging into the incredibly soft, fine threads of her cream cashmere dress. The material, which had felt like a second skin of luxury moments ago, now felt alien, a symbol of a life that was brutally ripped away. Within her, hope shifted, a gentle flutter, a tiny, innocent protest against the sudden, overwhelming chaos that had enveloped her mother. Elena slid down the cool concrete wall, a slow, graceless descent, the rough surface scratching softly against the delicate fabric of her dress. She continued until she was huddled on the utilitarian carpet, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. The coarse, gritty texture of the wall pressed against her back, cold and unyielding, a brutal physical reminder of her new reality. She pressed her cheek against it, seeking a grounding force, a solid presence in the maelstrom of her despair. The chill seeped into her skin, a physical echo of the cold, spreading dread gripping her heart. Her ears rang, a high-pitched, insistent whine that reverberated inside her skull, drowning out all other thoughts, leaving only the endless echo of Marcus's words. "You must leave." Not a request, not even a command, but a brutal, final pronouncement, delivered with such cold precision it had stripped her of breath. She tasted bile, metallic and bitter, burning at the back of her throat. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, not just from the creeping cold of the corridor, but from raw, exposed nerves screaming in protest. Each breath caught in her throat, a choked sob that she refused, absolutely refused, to release. She would not break, not now, not here. The baby, her precious hope, was the only thing that mattered. She had to be strong. For hope. Always for hope. Humiliation burned, a searing brand on her soul, a festering wound threatening to consume her. To be cast out so publicly, so callously dismissed before strangers, yes, but more acutely before him. Marcus, with his controlled fury, his eyes like chips of glacial ice, his mouth a tight, unforgiving line, had delivered the fatal blow without a flicker of remorse. And Camille, a predatory splash of vibrant crimson against the muted elegance of the lobby, her painted lips curving into a venomous smirk that stung Elena more deeply than any slap. They had orchestrated her downfall with a cruel, theatrical precision, turning her life into a public spectacle. Her hand instinctively tightened further on her belly, a desperate plea for protection. The tiny life within her stirred again, a small, trusting movement that sent a jolt of fierce resolve through Elena's shattered being. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about them. Her and hope. The omnipresent hum of the building infrastructure was a dull ache in the background, a constant low-frequency vibration that seemed to penetrate her very bones, a harsh reminder of the sprawling, indifferent luxury she was no longer deemed worthy of. She closed her eyes, pressing her eyelids shut, trying to block out the indelible image of Marcus's triumphant, placid smile as she was led away. That smile! It was meant to break her, to shatter her completely, to reduce her to nothing. But deep within the swirling vortex of despair, amidst the wreckage of her hopes and dreams, a tiny, defiant spark flickered, stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. She would not let him. She would not give him the satisfaction of her ruin. She repeated the words like a silent mantra, a desperate vow whispered to the concrete walls. I will not. A soft, almost imperceptible sound broke through the still ringing whine in her ears. A careful, measured step. It was the sound of rubber soles on the industrial carpet, quiet but distinct. Elena's eyes snapped open, blinking against the harsh reality of her surroundings. Standing a few feet away, illuminated by the dim, overhead fluorescent lighting that hummed and flickered faintly, was David Lee. His maroon bellhop uniform, so crisp and formal, almost regal in the gilded opulence of the lobby, now seemed muted, its vibrant colors subdued to a deep, somber wine red against the harsh, utilitarian backdrop of the corridor. The gold trim and buttons, so gleaming moments before, caught the poor light with a dull, almost resigned shimmer. He held a small rectangular object in his hand, his fingers steady. He said nothing, his presence a quiet, unwavering anchor in her storm. His gaze was kind, steady, meeting hers without flinching. There was no pity in them, no judgment, only a quiet, understanding concern that seeped into her battered soul like a balm. He knelt slowly, deliberately, his movements fluid and silent, the fabric of his uniform rustling barely audibly. His eyes were not fixed on her directly, but rather on the empty space of worn carpet beside her, a gesture of profound respect for her privacy in her moment of utter vulnerability. He placed the object gently on the carpet, then slid it with an almost imperceptible push towards her. It was a small black burner phone, anonymous and stark. Beside it, he laid a folded piece of paper, crisp and white against the gray. He straightened up, his movements as silent as before, rising effortlessly. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture laden with unspoken meaning and support. Then, as quietly and efficiently as he had appeared, he turned, disappearing back down the corridor, the soft click of a service door echoing his departure like a period at the end of a sentence. No words, no explanation, just a silent, extraordinary offering in the face of absolute despair. Elena stared at the phone. Its smooth, cold plastic felt alien beneath her trembling fingertips. It was cheap, anonymous, almost disposable, a stark contrast to the sleek, expensive devices she usually carried. She reached for the folded paper, her fingers brushing the unfamiliar texture before she unfurled it. There, in a clear, precise script, was a single number. No name, just digits. A lifeline, perhaps? Or a new kind of trap, carefully laid. She didn't know which, and the uncertainty was another twist of the knife. Her trembling fingers, still cold, smoothed the paper, pressing it flat against her thigh. The cold of the concrete wall continued to seep into her through her thin dress, a constant, physical reminder of her present circumstances. The sharp, clean scent of disinfectant hung heavily in the air, a constant, biting presence, in stark contrast to the cloying, suffocating sweetness of the lilies she'd left behind. A sweetness that now tasted of betrayal. She looked down at her belly, her hand finding its familiar resting place, her fingers tracing the gentle curve. Hope, her daughter. Her heart tightened with a fierce, protective love, an emotion so potent it almost brought her to her knees again. The shame, the raw pain of betrayal, the burning humiliation, it all coalesced not into further despair, but into a single, unyielding, burning resolve. She would not beg. She would not plead. She would not cry in public again. Not ever. She pushed herself up, slowly, painfully, her muscles protesting the sudden demand. Every fiber of her being ached, but she forced herself upright. Her chin lifted fractionally, a small but significant act of defiance. Her gaze, though still tear-stained, hardened, losing its vacant despair and gaining a steely glint. She looked at the stark corridor, at the silent phone in her hand, then back at the folded paper, the numbers, a tangible thread to an unknown future. A cold, fierce clarity descended, settling in her mind like a fresh winter's snow. She would survive this. She would fight. But as Elena sat there, a universe away from the gilded cage she had just been expelled from, Marcus Thorne was already setting his own, far more insidious, battle plan into motion. Miles above the city, insulated by glass and power, he moved with the chilling precision of a predator. The heavy oak door of the penthouse office clicked shut, its solid, definitive sound a muffled thud that sealed them inside a cocoon of absolute power. The air, chilled to a precise temperature, was still and silent, scented with the rich, dominant notes of old leather and the cedar wood of the vast, custom-built desk. The fragrance was a statement in itself, of permanence, of tradition, of masculine authority. Overlaid on it all was the sharp, peaty aroma of the 25-year-old single malt. Marcus was pouring, a smoky, almost medicinal scent mingled with the air. Below, the city of Miami sprawled, a glittering, silent tapestry. From this height, the vibrant, chaotic energy of the streets was rendered sterile and beautiful, a carpet of distant lights for him to look down upon. The only sounds were the musical clink of thick ice against heavy crystal, and Camille's throaty, triumphant laughter, a sound that seemed to dance in the thick, expensive air. She was a splash of crimson against the room's dark, masculine palette of blacks, charcoals, and deep browns. Her red silk dress was a vibrant slash of victory, clinging to a body toned by discipline and ambition. She was perched on the corner of the massive mahogany desk, as if it were her throne, one long leg swinging, the restless clatter of her stacked gold bracelets a percussive accompaniment to her mirth. Her face, Marcus! My God, did you see her face? The way it just crumbled. Marcus swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a slow, deliberate motion that sent the ice cracking softly. He was a predator savoring the kill, drawing out the moment. I saw a problem being solved. His voice was a low, even baritone, stripped of emotion. He handed her the second glass, his fingers deliberately brushing hers, a fleeting, proprietary touch. His suit jacket was off now, slung carelessly over a leather armchair. His shirt sleeves, the cuffs monogrammed in subtle gray thread, were rolled up to his powerful forearms. The silk lining of his suit whispered against his skin. He was relaxed. He was in command. He believed with every fiber of his being that he had already won. "A problem?" Camille scoffed, taking a delicate, theatrical sip. The scotch was strong, but she didn't flinch. She was a ghost haunting her own life, a pretty placeholder. You didn't solve a problem, you just opened the door and let the poor thing drift out. She ran a blood-red nail across the cool, smooth surface of a thick, leather-bound folder lying on the desk, her touch both a caress and a claim. Is this it? The final act? He smiled, that same chilling, placid expression from the lobby, but here, in private, it was wider. It was pure, undiluted gloating. The opening salvo. He flipped the folder open. The pages inside were crisp, orderly, a testament to his meticulous, weaponized cruelty. Divorce petition. Cites irreconcilable differences, but my legal team has a supplemental file. It details her erratic behavior over the last 6 months, a carefully constructed narrative of emotional instability, complete with sworn statements from staff she thought were her friends. He fanned out another set of documents, the paper cool and slick under the lamplight. Asset transfer confirmations. Everything is firewalled. The accounts she thought were joint? They were structured as revocable trusts, contingent on my sole discretion. Her signature is on a dozen authorization forms she never bothered to read. She thought she was signing for household expenses. He tapped a third file, this one thinner, more menacing. This one's my favorite, a preliminary motion to deny custodial rights. It argues that her unstable condition and her recent outburst make her an unfit mother. He finally looked up from the papers, meeting Camille's gaze, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. I will not have my child raised by a weak woman. She was merely a decorative vessel. You are not a factor. Camille's laughter died, a flicker of something new, calculation, moving across her sharp features. The party was over. She slid off the desk, the soft chime of her bracelets the only sound as she moved to stand directly in front of him, a deliberate, physical barrier between him and his trophies on the desk. The negotiation had begun. Your child, she repeated, her voice a low, silken purr that was more dangerous than her laughter. So, now that she's gone, what about us? What about our future? Marcus took a long swallow of his scotch, the burn grounding him. He enjoyed her ambition, her fire. It was a thrilling contrast to his wife's passive gentility. but he only enjoyed it when it served his own agenda. "We have the present, my dear. Isn't it exquisite?" "I want more than the present." Her hand went to his chest, her nails tracing the fine fabric of his shirt, a hint of a threat in their sharpness. "I am not some girl you keep on the payroll, Marcus. I helped you build this. I planned the narrative. I deserve a real stake, equity, a title that isn't executive assistant." Her eyes were hard, demanding, chips of brilliant, unyielding jade. "I need to be Miss Thorne." He felt a flash of hot irritation. This was not the plan. The plan was for him to have a beautiful, intelligent, compliant partner who understood the hierarchy. He had just disposed of one inconvenience. He had no intention of installing a more demanding one. He looked past her, at the empty space by the window where Elena would have stood, quiet and unassuming. A flicker of contempt crossed his face. He allowed himself a small, private moment of reflection. Elena never asked for anything. He said it to wound Camille, to put her back in her place, but the memory of his wife's quiet compliance only fed his disdain for her. The memory surfaced. She was merely a decorative vessel. The air thickened, growing heavy and charged. Camille's eyes narrowed. She recognized the dismissal in his tone, the casual cruelty that he had, until now, reserved only for others. This was the precipice. She pulled her hand back from his chest as if his shirt were suddenly scorched. This was her moment. She had to secure her position now, before his victory settled and she became just another beautifully upholstered part of the furniture. She took a slow, deliberate breath, visibly calming herself. Her entire expression softened, the hard demand melting away, replaced by a feigned, fragile vulnerability that was a masterwork of manipulation. "There's a reason I need security, Marcus. A reason this is so important to me now." She took his hand, the one holding the cold, heavy Scotch glass, the condensation slick against his skin. She brought it to her own flat stomach, pressing his palm firmly against her over the tight red silk of her dress. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, intimate and irreversible. "I need to be Miss Thorne." Marcus froze. The ice in his glass gave a sudden sharp crack, the sound like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. He stared at her, his mind, for once, lagging a step behind. He followed her gaze down to his hand on her belly, a brand on her red dress. He searched her eyes, his brain racing, looking for the lie, for the angle, for the negotiation tactic. This change. He found nothing but a carefully constructed, brilliantly executed sincerity. "You're?" The word was a dry rasp, barely audible. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her eyes wide, holding his. The flash of annoyance on his face vanished, erased by a slow dawning wave of pure, unadulterated triumph. Of course, the universe was not just rewarding him, it was crowning him. He had purged the weak, flawed element from his life, and in its place, a new, stronger legacy was already taking root. A child, not with a decorative vessel, but with a woman who understood power, a woman who fought for what she wanted, a child with her. The irony of casting out one pregnant woman only to embrace another was utterly lost on him. He saw only symmetry, perfection, a victory so complete it felt like destiny. A broad, genuine smile finally broke across his face, a startling, transformative sight that lit up his severe features. He pulled her into him, his free arm wrapping around her waist, crushing the red silk against him. He felt invincible, a king, a god. He released her just as abruptly, his mind already churning, racing ahead. His energy was a palpable electric current in the room. He strode around the desk, his movements sharp and energized, and grabbed the sleek black phone from its cradle. He punched a number from memory. "It's Thorne." His voice was sharp, decisive, annihilating. "Initiate the protocol. File everything tonight. All of it. No contact, no settlement talks. I want her erased." He listened for a moment, a cold smirk playing on his lips as the voice on the other end presumably raised a question. "The child?" "She can prove it's mine when she's begging for change on a street corner. I want nothing left of her. Burn it all." He slammed the phone down into its cradle, the crack echoing the earlier sound of the ice. The point of no return. It was done. Adrenaline coursed through him, a feeling more potent and clarifying than any scotch. He was the master of his own universe. Everything was aligned. Everything was his. He picked up his drink and walked toward the immense plate glass window, the expensive wool rug muting his footsteps. The city lights shimmered below like a carpet of conquered jewels. In the dark glass he saw his own form, a powerful silhouette against the glittering skyline, a king surveying his domain. He toasted his own reflection. While Marcus reveled in his perceived victory, confident that he had erased her from his life, Elena was reaching for the one faint thread of connection David Lee had offered. Unaware of the ruthless machinations already underway, she grasped at a fragile hope. The cold burner phone felt light, yet a crushing weight settled in her chest, suffocating her breath. The plastic, cheap and faintly greasy from her nervous grip, seemed to mock the silk and cashmere she usually adorned. She had called the single, cryptic number David had pressed into her palm just hours before, her fingers fumbling, stiff with a strange mix of dread and faint, flickering hope. Over the unfamiliar digits on the small, scratched screen, the connection clicked, a hollow, tinny sound, and then it rang once, twice, a sterile, distant chime that seemed to echo the vast emptiness in her own life. A growing void she couldn't quite comprehend. Then, not a human voice, but a pre-recorded message clicked in, bland and automated, a flat, robotic female voice informing her, in emotionless tones, that the number was no longer in service. No answer. No explanation, just a curt digital dismissal. The sound vibrated against her ear, a metallic hum that seemed to chill her to the bone. She lowered the phone slowly, her thumb hovering, trembling almost imperceptibly over the call button again. Her mind raced, a frantic flurry of questions. Who was this person David had wanted her to contact? Why had he given her this dead end? A desperate hope, a fragile, desperate thing, had flared briefly, only to be ruthlessly extinguished, leaving behind a bitter, acrid taste of futility that washed over her like a cold, bone-chilling wave. The cheap device felt suddenly heavy, a leaden weight in her palm despite its physical lightness. She needed to go home. The word itself felt like a hollow mockery, an echo in a cavern of despair, but it was the only place left, the only anchor in a world suddenly unmoored. Her own apartment, a sanctuary she had meticulously curated over years, a haven of muted creams and soft textures, of diffused light and the subtle scent of gardenia and bergamot, a space she had filled with quiet joy, a reflection of the peace she had once believed was her right. Now, The thought of it was a distant, almost painful memory. She pushed herself away from the rough concrete wall of the service alley, the unforgiving surface scraping faintly against the delicate cashmere of her sleeve. Her muscles, stiff from the shock and the uncomfortable crouch, protested with dull aches, particularly in her lower back and neck. Her cream cashmere dress, a luxurious garment chosen that morning for its comforting softness, now felt less like a symbol of comfort and more like a fragile, inadequate shield against the hostile world that was closing in around her. The thin metallic tang of disinfectant, sharp and chemical, clung to her, a phantom scent from the hotel's sterile corridors, a constant, unpleasant reminder of her banishment. A foul perfume on the air. The service corridor, a hidden artery of the opulent hotel, was a labyrinth of stark angles and humming pipes, their vibrations a low, persistent thrum beneath the industrial linoleum floor. The air here was colder, recycled, and stale, carrying faint undertones of cleaning supplies and kitchen grease. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows that stretched and warped with every step she took. She navigated it with a determined, almost brittle focus, her chin held high, a rigid line of defiance, her eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the periphery. There were no more tears. The well had run dry, leaving only a dry, burning resolve that scraped against her throat like sandpaper. She passed a hotel maid, a woman whose name she vaguely recalled, whose face had always offered a warm, maternal smile, usually accompanied by a cheerful, "Good morning, Miss Dubois," or "Have a lovely day." Today the woman's eyes were averted, fixed intently on the industrial cleaning cart she pushed, its plastic wheels squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Her movements were stiff, almost hurried, her shoulders hunched as if to disappear. Further down, the bellhops, usually so solicitous, so eager to open doors and offer assistance, now held their gazes firmly to the scuffed floor of the service exit. Their backs were ramrod straight, their faces impassive, a blank wall of indifference. Not one met her gaze, not one offered a customary nod. It was a silent, collective dismissal, colder than any spoken word. Each averted gaze was a small, stinging cut to her dignity. Each silent dismissal, a fresh, throbbing bruise on her already battered spirit. She could practically feel their unspoken whispers, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She stepped out into the humid Miami air, the dense tropical heat, a shocking, almost suffocating embrace after the chilled, artificial interior of the hotel. The sun, a brutal white disk in the sky, beat down with an oppressive intensity, immediately prickling her skin. Scent of salt from the nearby ocean, now intertwined with the acrid fumes of exhaust from the busy street and the sickly sweet decay of overripe tropical fruit, filled her lungs, raw and abrasive, burning slightly with each inhale. It was a sensory assault. Her car, the pearl-white Mercedes, Benz S-Class, a silent, elegant fixture in its reserved spot, precisely aligned, gleaming under the South Florida sun. She walked towards the familiar space, her steps growing heavy with an unspoken dread. As she rounded the corner, her gaze fell upon the empty asphalt. The spot was vacant. Shock was a physical blow, punching air from her lungs. A cold knot of ice tightened, constricting her insides. It wasn't just gone, misplaced, or driven by a valet to another lot. It had been taken. Systematically, deliberately, The realization was a new layer of terror. A taxi, a battered, anonymous yellow box, its paint faded and scratched, pulled up to the curb, seemingly appearing out of nowhere in the bright, indifferent afternoon sun. The air shimmering above its dented roof. She opened the door, the flimsy handle warm beneath her palm. The interior assaulted her with a stale melange of air freshener attempting to mask the deep-seated odors of forgotten cigarettes, spilled coffee, and desperation. The vinyl seats were sticky, worn smooth in places. "My address, please," she heard herself say, her voice steady, an unnerving calm that belied the violent tremor now shaking her core, vibrating through her bones. She recited the familiar numbers, her home address, a litany of comfort she hoped, against all mounting evidence, still held true. The drive was a blur of sun-drenched boulevards and towering palm trees, their fronds swaying lazily in a breeze that offered no relief from the heat. At the impeccably manicured entrance to her gated community, where fountains perpetually splashed in vibrant bougainvillea climbed meticulously trimmed trellises, the guard, a man named Jorge whom she had greeted by name for years, his face usually creased with a warm smile, peered at her through the heavily tinted window of the taxi. His expression was utterly blank, devoid of any recognition or warmth. He shook his head slowly, deliberately. The gesture was like a hammer blow. "I'm sorry, Miss Dubois," he said, his voice flat, formal, a tone she had never heard him use. "My instructions are clear. Access denied." Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "What? Jorge, what are you talking about? It's me, Elena." He kept his eyes fixed on some point just beyond her, his jaw set. "I understand, ma'am, but I have been explicitly told not to allow you inside." His words were clipped, his gaze unwavering, betraying nothing. The taxi driver, sensing the tension, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. With a numb hand, Elena paid the driver with the last $20 bill she had, the worn fabric feeling impossibly thin between her fingers. Her credit cards, useless gilded plastic, felt like cold, mocking remnants of a vanished life. She stepped out onto the pristine, sun-drenched sidewalk, the manicured lawns and towering palms, usually a source of quiet pleasure, now a cruel mockery of her situation, an opulent backdrop to her utter desolation. The air was heavy with the cloying scent of freshly mown grass and blooming jasmine, a sweetness that now felt sickening. Her home, a sleek, modern edifice of glass and white stucco, its sharp lines and expansive windows radiating an air of untouchable elegance, stood before her, impassive and unyielding, a beautiful old stranger. The wrought iron gate, a familiar ornate barrier that had always welcomed her, was now a formidable, unyielding wall. She approached her front door, a heavy, custom-made slab of dark, polished wood, inlaid with brushed steel accents. Her keys, a familiar weight, felt suddenly foreign, their cuts no longer promising entry. She inserted the master key into the lock, the cold metal biting into the smooth, dark wood. It clicked, a faint, metallic sound that offered a fleeting surge of hope, but the mechanism wouldn't turn. It was jammed, or perhaps just replaced. She tried again, a desperate urgency now gripping her, her hand twisting violently, her knuckles aching with the effort. The lock remained stubbornly fixed, unyielding to her frantic attempts. Then, a small, insidious red light on the security panel beside the door began to flash, a rhythmic, ominous pulse against the stark white stucco. It was a silent warning, a definitive declaration. The system had been reset. Her code, her keys, her access, all irrevocably gone. The house, her sanctuary, had swallowed itself whole, leaving her on the outside. She pressed her hand to her belly, a protective, almost instinctual gesture, a silent, whispered conversation with the life within her. A gentle flutter, a tiny, indescribably precious movement, stirred against the growing coldness of her reality, a fragile spark in the encroaching darkness. Hope. Her baby. Where would she go? What would she do? The sun beat down, relentless and indifferent, a glaring reminder of the passage of time and her worsening plight. The heat radiated from the sidewalk, rising in waves, making the air shimmer. As Elena faced the brutal reality of her sudden destitution, Marcus Thorne was meticulously sealing her fate, transforming her personal tragedy into a cold, calculated legal triumph. Meanwhile, high above the city, Marcus Thorne presided over his domain. The glass-walled conference room at Dubois Hospitality Group headquarters was less a room and more a shrine to his calculated ambition, a gleaming testament to his ruthless ascent. It floated, suspended high above the sprawling metropolis, offering a panoramic, almost godlike view of Miami's shimmering coastline, the turquoise ocean meeting the endless blue sky. The air within was sterile, frigid, chilled to an arctic precision that nipped at the exposed skin, carrying the sharp, clean scent of fresh paper, expensive toner, and a faint, almost clinical aroma of polished steel and antiseptic. 3 lawyers, sharp-suited and grim, sat opposite him at the long, reflective chrome table, their expressions a carefully cultivated blend of deference and legal acuity. Files, neat and imposing, bound in expensive leather, were stacked before them, silent testaments to the meticulously planned dismantling of a life. The accounts. Marcus's voice was a low, controlled rumble, a predator's purr barely disguising the underlying menace. His dark suit, custom-tailored and faultless, moved with every precise, deliberate gesture, the expensive fabric rustling faintly. "Frozen, sir," the lead attorney, a lean man with eyes like chipped ice, responded promptly, his voice devoid of any inflection. "All joint accounts, naturally." "The revocable trusts have been terminated, as per the terms we advised. Her personal debit cards have been flagged and canceled, and all credit lines, both personal and corporate, are now inactive. Furthermore, all supplemental cards linked to your primary accounts were deactivated this morning." Marcus leaned back, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, a flicker of cold satisfaction in his gaze. "And the properties?" "The deeds were signed over to the holding company a year ago, Mr. Thorne, as per the prenuptial agreement you wisely insisted upon. She retained no beneficial interest in any of them. We've secured the Miami residence. New locks were installed less than an hour ago. Security codes changed, all access points disabled for her. Her vehicle, the Mercedes, has been repossessed and placed in a secure, off-site storage facility." Marcus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that held no warmth, a rustle of dead leaves. Efficient indeed. He glanced casually at a screen embedded seamlessly in the polished glass surface of the table. A live feed flickered to life, showing Elena, a small, distant figure, agonizingly familiar even from this height, standing outside her former home, her shoulders noticeably slumped. He zoomed in slightly, the image sharpening with a faint digital hum. He watched as her hand went instinctively to her belly. A flicker of something, perhaps contempt, perhaps a fleeting, unacknowledged discomfort, crossed his otherwise impassive face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She clings to that child like a drowning woman to driftwood, doesn't she? The preliminary injunction for custody? Another lawyer inquired, a younger man, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses nervously, the slight click echoing in the hushed room. File it with the divorce petition simultaneously, Marcus commanded, his voice gaining a sharper edge. Argue parental unsuitability. Cite the public incident at the Grand Riviera. Emphasize her erratic behavior during the last 6 months of the marriage. We have the signed affidavits from the former housekeeper and driver, correct? Indeed, Mr. Thorne, the lead attorney confirmed, pulling a slim file from the stack. Both Maria, the housekeeper, and Guillermo, the driver, have provided notarized statements. They stated she exhibited unpredictable emotional outbursts, a lack of judgment in public settings, and a consistent neglect of her personal responsibilities and marital duties. His voice was a flat recitation of grievances, each word a carefully chosen weapon. Excellent! Marcus finally looked away from the screen, his eyes sweeping over the lawyers, a king surveying his loyal, albeit slightly uncomfortable subjects. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of power vibrated in the air around him. I will not have my child raised by a weak woman. The words hung in the frigid air, thick with unspoken meaning, a chilling, absolute pronouncement that brooked no argument. I want nothing left for her. Nothing. She will understand the true cost of defiance. At that moment, a junior associate, barely out of law school, entered the conference room with quiet efficiency, carrying a slim, official-looking envelope. He moved with a practiced, almost deferential haste, placing it gently before the lead attorney. The service is complete, sir. She accepted the documents directly. Marcus's smile widened, a cold, triumphant crescent that did not reach his eyes. Perfect timing, he murmured, the words almost a sigh of profound satisfaction. He had engineered her downfall with chilling precision, and now the instruments of her ruin were delivered directly into her hands. Back on the sun-baked street, the asphalt radiating heat in visible waves, Elena stared at the document in her hand. The heavy, legal-grade paper, stiff and unyielding, felt alien, cold, and foreign against her warm skin, somehow heavier than its actual weight. The bold black letters at the top screamed at her, petition for dissolution of marriage. Her eyes blurred, a hot, stinging film of unshed tears threatening to obscure the text, but she forced herself to read, her gaze sweeping across the official jargon. Each word was a sharpened dagger plunging into her already raw, exposed heart. Irreconcilable differences, she snorted, a bitter, humorless sound. That was an understatement. Then came the carefully constructed narrative of her erratic behavior, a twisted distortion of reality, painted with cruel, calculated statements. She recognized the names. Maria, her former housekeeper, a woman she had trusted implicitly for years, a woman who had wept with her after her miscarriage last year, holding her as Elena sobbed into her shoulder, offering silent comfort and mugs of chamomile tea. Maria, who had sworn loyalty just weeks ago. Betrayal. It was a fresh wound, deeper and more agonizing than anything Marcus himself could inflict, a corrosive acid eating at her soul. And then she saw it, buried within the dense legal text, stark and terrifying, the motion to deny custodial rights. Her breath hitched, a raw, strangled sound tearing from her throat. her baby, Hope. They wanted to take Hope. The world tilted violently on its axis, the bright Miami afternoon dissolving into a dizzying kaleidoscope of color and heat. A blinding white-hot rage, pure and incandescent, ignited within her, burning away the suffocating despair, the biting humiliation, the paralyzing shock. The memory surfaced. You are not a factor. It consumed the fear, replacing it with a furious resolve that pulsed through her veins like molten lead. They would not touch her child. They would not take her Hope. She looked up at her house, at the now impenetrable gate, at the flashing red light on the security panel, a tiny, malevolent eye staring back at her. It was a fortress, yes, but a fortress of her former life, now turned viciously against her, its every barrier designed to keep her out. She was outside, alone, with nothing but the cream cashmere dress on her back, now stained and rumpled, a cheap plastic burner phone clutched in her hand, and a sheaf of legal documents designed to tear her apart, piece by agonizing piece. The concrete of the sidewalk burned beneath her bare arms as she sank slowly to the ground, her knees drawn up, her head bowed. Her hands, still trembling, clutched the divorce papers, a desperate, futile shield against the unbearable truth. Her hand instinctively found her belly, a fierce, protective grip, a silent promise to the life stirring within. Her daughter. They would not win. Only the phone, cold and insignificant, remained, a last, slender thread connecting her to a world that had just cast her out. The fire of her resolve, however, was quickly being tested by a new, terrifying reality. The sheer stress, the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day had taken its toll, and her body was beginning to betray her. Furious rage had been a shield, a wall of fire against despair's creeping cold. But fire consumes. As it receded, it left behind a hollowed-out ruin, and in that ruin, pain bloomed. It began as a deep, internal clench, a muscular fist tightening around her spine. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her lower back. Then came a second, sharper spasm, this one low in her belly, a fierce, wrenching cramp that stole her breath. A sudden, trickling, wet warmth spread down her legs, a terrifying counterpoint to the cold dread seizing her heart. Too soon. It was far too soon. The burner phone was useless, a dead plastic brick. The divorce papers were a meaningless script. The house was a fortress sealed against her. The world had shrunk to the burning concrete beneath her, the indifferent sun, and this new, escalating agony. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. Not now. She would not fall apart on a stranger's sidewalk. Chin up! A yellow taxi, not the same one, slowed as it passed, the driver's curious face peering out. Elena pushed herself to her feet, a wave of dizziness making the manicured street tilt and swim. She waved a weak hand, a gesture of desperate appeal. The taxi pulled over, its engine a low, rattling grumble. The driver, a kind-faced man with worry in his eyes, rolled down the window. "Ma'am? You all right? I need to get to the hospital." The words were strained, each one punctuated by another invisible, vice-like grip on her insides. "And I need to make a call. Please, it's an emergency." He saw the spreading stain on the back of her cream dress. He saw the sweat on her brow, the stark pallor beneath her skin. He didn't hesitate. He pushed open the passenger door and handed her his own phone. "Call who you need. Mercy Hospital is 10 minutes away." Her fingers, slick with sweat, trembled as she typed the number for the Grand Riviera. She knew it by heart. The operator's polite, professional voice was a jarring sound from another universe. The Grand Riviera. How may I direct your call? Marcus Thorne's office. Now. The command was raw, stripped of all politeness. A click, a pause, then his voice, cold, clipped, impatient. Thorne! It's me! Her own voice was a ghost. Another wave of pain crested, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out, the coppery taste of blood, a sharp tang on her tongue. A heavy silence on the other end. He was in his glass-walled conference room. She knew it. He would be looking down on the city like a god. What do you want, Elena? I'm in a meeting. He spoke with crisp impatience. The baby, she gasped, leaning her head against the sticky vinyl of the taxi's headrest. The cheap air freshener, a cloying pine scent, filled her nostrils, making her want to gag. It's coming! Now! It's too early, Marcus. Something's wrong. She struggled for breath. The line went quiet for a full 3 seconds. In his sterile, high-altitude office, Marcus Thorne looked away from the quarterly projections on the screen. He pictured the delivery room from their first loss, the one that had been so sterile and so silent. He remembered the doctor's hollow words, the suffocating absence of a cry that should have been there, a raw, visceral ache, long buried, resurfaced with shocking clarity. An echo of that old, forgotten failure tightened his chest, a cold, parental dread. For one bare, flickering second, he was not a victor, but simply a father, afraid of losing another child. Then the second passed. Weakness. That was weakness. He had purged it. He had moved on. This was just another complication, another messy, inconvenient detail in a transaction that should have been clean. That sounds like a personal problem, not a professional one. His voice was ice. You have been served with papers, Elena. Our communication is to be handled by our respective attorneys. Do not call this number again. The click of the disconnected line was more violent than a slap. It echoed the finality of the locked door, the empty car space, the void where her life had been. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the floor mat. The memory surfaced. You are not a factor. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of pity and alarm, and pressed harder on the accelerator. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic layered over stale fear. The texture of the paper-thin gown they gave her was rough against her feverish skin. The chilled air of the examination room raised goosebumps on her arms. A nurse with a gentle but firm grip inserted an IV. The prick of the needle, a distant, insignificant pain compared to the relentless, rhythmic contractions that now gripped her body, pulling her under like a merciless tide. Her beautiful cashmere dress, a remnant of her other life, lay in a heap on a chair, ruined. They put a monitor on her belly. The rhythmic, galloping sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the small room. A frantic, rapid drumbeat. Too fast. A young doctor with serious eyes studied the printout, his brow furrowed. The baby's in distress, and you're losing too much blood. We need to move. We need to do a C-section. Elena's hand went to her belly, a shield, a prayer. Her daughter! Hope! The world narrowed to that frantic heartbeat and the doctor's grim face. Then the door to her room swished open. The sound of it was soft, but the presence that filled the doorway was a discordant scream of color and noise. Camille stood there, a vision in a skin-tight, blood-red dress. Her gold bracelets clattered as she crossed her arms, the sound sharp and abrasive against the steady beep of the heart monitor. She surveyed the scene, Elena pale and trembling in the flimsy gown, the IV drip, the ominous printout spooling from the machine with a look of undisguised predatory curiosity. "Well, well," Camille's voice was a low purr. "I heard there was some drama. I had to see for myself. Marcus is detained. He sent me to get an update." It was a lie. Elena knew it instantly. Marcus hadn't sent her. Camille had come on her own, drawn by the scent of blood in the water, a vulture circling a kill. She had come to witness the final collapse, to confirm her victory. Elena looked at the woman who had helped orchestrate her ruin. She saw the expensive red dress, the perfectly applied makeup, the smug certainty. She felt the searing pain of another contraction, a fire consuming her from the inside out. She thought of Marcus's cold voice on the phone, and in that crucible of pain and betrayal, a strange, hard clarity formed. She lifted her chin. "You have no place here." Camille's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "I think I do. That baby," she gestured towards Elena's belly with a crimson-tipped nail, "is a thorn, my future stepchild. I have every right to be concerned about its welfare." The lie was so audacious, so monstrous, that it didn't even sting. It was simply pathetic. Elena's focus narrowed, the sounds of the hospital fading into a dull hum. Her world was the frantic beat of her daughter's heart, and the burning path to get her out, to get her safe. A team of nurses and another doctor entered the room, their movements brisk and urgent. "It's time, Miss Dubois. We need to go now." They began to wheel her gurney out. Camille stood her ground for a moment, an immovable splash of red in the sterile corridor, expecting to be acknowledged, to be fought with. But Elena's eyes were fixed forward. She didn't give her another glance. She was already gone, moving toward the only thing that mattered. Camille was left standing alone in the empty room, the triumphant jangle of her jewelry suddenly sounding hollow and foolish. The operating room was a shock of cold and bright white light. The air smelled of iodine and ozone. Voices were low, professional, a swift current of medical jargon flowing around her. Someone explained the spinal block, the numbness that would spread up from her toes. She felt a cold prick and then a spreading, heavy warmth. The pain began to recede, replaced by an unnerving lack of sensation. She was just a mind, floating, tethered to a body she could no longer feel. A green curtain went up, a wall between her and the work they were doing. A nurse stood by her head, her hand a warm, steady pressure on Elena's shoulder. "It's going to be okay! Just breathe!" But fear was a cold sea, and she was sinking. She was alone. He wasn't here. He had left her. He was trying to take this child, this piece of her soul, before she even had a chance to hold her. His final words from the penthouse, a memory she didn't even know she'd stored, surfaced with chilling clarity. The memory surfaced. "I will not have my child raised by a weak woman." The words echoed in the cold, silent space of her mind. The memory surfaced. Weak woman. The insult was meant to be a blade. Instead, it became a spark. A fire ignited in the frozen landscape of her fear. No, she was not weak. She had survived his betrayal. She had walked out of that hotel. She had gotten herself here. She would bring her daughter into this world, and she would protect her with a strength Marcus Thorne could never comprehend. She felt a strange tugging, a pressure high in her chest. The doctors murmured. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of her own heart monitor, a lonely, steady metronome. Then, a new sound. It was not a wail, but a sharp, furious gasp, a tiny engine catching fire. It tore through the sterile air, a raw, living thread of sound that vibrated against the metal and tile. It was the most beautiful noise she had ever heard, a defiant cry that pushed back the silence, that declared its own existence. It was the sound of life, the sound of hope. Tears, hot and sudden, streamed from Elena's eyes, tracing paths down her temples into her hair. The nurse smiled down at her. "She's here! She's perfect!" The raw, visceral intensity of childbirth slowly faded, leaving Elena utterly drained but filled with an overwhelming, protective love. Hours passed in a haze of medical care and silent wonder. Later, in the quiet dimness of a private recovery room, the world had shrunk to the size of the bed. The frantic beeping was gone, replaced by a soft, rhythmic hush. A nurse entered, carrying a small bundle wrapped in a soft, white hospital blanket. "Someone's ready to meet her mother." She gently placed the baby in the crook of Elena's arm. The weight was astounding, so small and yet so solid, so real. Elena looked down. A perfect, tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, a dusting of dark hair. She could smell the faint, sweet scent of her daughter's skin beneath the antiseptic hospital smell. One tiny hand, fingers curled into a miniature fist, lay against the blanket. Elena reached out a finger and gently touched it. The fist uncurled, and the tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around hers, a grip of surprising strength. Her daughter, her hope, everything that had been taken from her, everything that had been destroyed, it all faded into insignificance. The penthouse, the money, the lies, the cruelty, they were ghosts from a life that was no longer hers. She held her new beginning. The muted hum of the various machines in the neonatal wing formed a peculiar lullaby, a soft, constant murmur that barely disturbed the deep, almost reverent silence of the night. It was a rhythm she had come to associate with survival, with the fragile yet resilient beat of life, a counterpoint to the quiet desperation that clawed at the edges of her own consciousness. Elena lay on the hospital bed, the crisp, starched white sheets, a startling contrast to the creamy pallor of her skin, still tender and weary from the ordeal of childbirth. Every muscle ached with a profound, deep-seated fatigue, but sleep remained an elusive, unwelcome guest, its gentle embrace stubbornly withheld. She was acutely aware of the lingering scent of antiseptic, sharp and clinical, that permeated every fiber of the room, a stark reminder of her surroundings. Yet even that harsh fragrance was softened by the faint, undeniably sweet aroma of new baby. Hope, her daughter, a tiny, impossibly perfect bundle, slept soundly nestled in the crook of her arm. Her breathing was a shallow, rhythmic whisper against the quiet, a sound so delicate it felt as though a single harsh word could shatter it. Elena's thumb traced the delicate curve of Hope's ear, feeling the velvety softness of her skin, the surprising strength in the tiny grip that occasionally tightened around her finger. The soft swaddling blanket, still bearing the faint scent of the hospital laundry, rose and fell with each minuscule breath, a testament to the miracle she now held, a constant, gentle rise and fall that mesmerized her. The air in the room chilled to a constant, controlled temperature that doctors often cited as optimal for newborns, made the fine hairs on her arms prickle with a persistent chill. A sensation that mirrored the cold knot of anxiety that had taken root deep in her stomach. Her gaze, heavy-lidded with exhaustion, drifted to the window, a dark, reflective rectangle that mirrored the dim, muted room back at her, a silent, unblinking eye reflecting her own weariness. Beyond the glass, Miami slept, a sprawling canvas of distant, shimmering lights against the inky blackness of the pre-dawn sky. It felt impossibly far away, a bustling metropolis she had once called home, now reduced to an abstract, unfeeling sprawl, irrelevant to her immediate, claustrophobic reality. The soft glow of the monitor beside the crib cast dancing shadows on the wall, each flicker a gentle reminder of the precious, vulnerable life beside her. Her entire world had, in the past few agonizing hours, narrowed to this small, sterile room, to this tiny, precious life, and to the immense, suffocating weight of a decision she had fiercely, stubbornly put off for hours, perhaps even days, pushing it to the very brink of her endurance. Her hand, almost on its own volition, moved, stroking Hope's soft, dark hair, a silent, desperate question forming in the cavern of her mind. What now? How do I protect you, my little one, from the storm that's brewing? The burner phone, a relic from a life she had desperately hoped to leave behind, still surprisingly charged, lay on the bedside table. It was a small, black rectangle, cheap and unassuming, its plastic casing faintly scratched from previous neglect, yet it held the last vestiges of her past life, the final, frayed cord she had desperately, foolishly refused to cut. Calling him her father meant admitting a profound, devastating defeat. It meant exposing the raw, bleeding wound Marcus had inflicted, tearing through the carefully constructed facade of her independence, her fierce desire to prove she could stand on her own 2 feet. Pride, a stubborn, unyielding companion since childhood, warred fiercely with a primal, instinctual need to protect her daughter, a need so potent it overshadowed every other emotion. Every last shred of ego, she had nothing left, absolutely nothing. No home to return to, its warmth and familiarity now a chilling memory, no car to drive away in. Only the distant roar of Miami traffic to remind her of what she lost. No money to secure their future, her accounts emptied, systematically plundered. Just hope, and the cold, hard certainty that Hope needed more than just her mother's fierce, unwavering love to survive this cruel, sudden twist of fate. Her chin lifted, a subtle but determined gesture, her jaw setting with a newfound steely resolve. No, not defeat. This was survival. Pure, unadulterated, desperate survival for Hope, for her future. And if that meant swallowing her pride and invoking the formidable name she had spent a lifetime trying to escape, then so be it. She reached for the phone, the cheap plastic cold and unforgiving against her fingertips, a stark contrast to the warmth of Hope's tiny, living form. Her thumb, trembling almost imperceptibly, hesitated a fraction of an inch above the single stored contact. Father! The name alone was a fortress, a symbol of a power she had always taken for granted, always sought to escape, to prove herself independent from. A distant, imposing figure, yet one whose influence was undeniable. Now, In this moment of utter desolation, it was her last, fragile hope. The numbers, a sequence she had known since childhood, etched into her memory through countless reluctant calls and formal updates, were burned into her mind. She inhaled slowly, deeply, then exhaled, her breath a silent prayer, a whispered plea for strength, before finally dialing. Her fingers, despite the violent tremor that had begun to course through her veins, remained steady, resolute, following the well-worn path of memory. The phone rang once, the distant, elegant chime, a stark mockery of the grimy plastic in her hand, a sound that resonated with the refined world she had fled. Then, a second time, the sound echoing in the preternatural quiet of the hospital room, each ring a hammer blow against her tightly wound nerves, drawing out the excruciating suspense. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible click. A deep, resonant voice, unmistakably his, filled the quiet space, instantly recognizable even through the faint static of the cheap phone. Authoritative, calm, unyielding, a voice that commanded attention, brooked no argument, a voice that could reshape worlds with a single utterance. "Dubois," the voice stated, a question and a statement woven into a single potent word, delivered with an almost chilling certainty. Elena swallowed hard, her throat suddenly tight and dry, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest. "Father!" She managed the word, a thin whisper, barely audible, laced with a mix of deference and a raw, aching vulnerability she hated herself for revealing. A beat of pregnant silence stretched between them, an ocean of unspoken history and strained relations, of expectations and disappointments. Elena imagined him in his study, the rich scent of leather and old books, the precise order of his life. Elena? His voice, when it came again, was laced with a hint of surprise, a faint thread of concern that Elena hadn't heard directed at her in years. It was almost disarming. "Why are you calling this late? Is everything all right?" The question, so deceptively simple, carried an undercurrent of genuine worry, unfamiliar and deeply unsettling in its unexpected warmth. Her resolve, hard-won through hours of internal agony and fear, held firm, a brittle shield against the tide of her emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She spoke, each word a shard of glass, sharp and painful, tearing at her own composure as much as it revealed her vulnerability. He took everything. Her voice was a barely audible whisper, raw with unshed tears, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "My home, my car, my accounts, every last cent." She paused, a choked sob catching in her throat, a desperate gasp for air as the full weight of her destitution pressed down. "He filed for divorce!" Another ragged breath, the confession ripping through her, leaving her exposed. "He wants hope." The final words were the hardest, the most painful, forcing her to voice the ultimate threat. The line went utterly, terrifyingly silent. The hospital hum seemed to intensify, growing louder, more insistent in the sudden void, as if the very air around them was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Elena could hear nothing but her own frantic heartbeat, a frantic drum against her ears, and the gentle, oblivious whisper of hope's breathing. The silence from the other end was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then his voice returned lower and far more dangerous than before, stripped bare of any pretense of calm, of any lingering surprise. It was the voice of a man whose carefully constructed world had just been irrevocably shaken, whose deepest foundations had been assaulted. It was the voice of Dubois, the man whose power she both feared and, now, desperately needed. "What did you say?" The command hung in the air, a physical force that seemed to press down on Elena, stealing the remaining breath from her lungs, demanding an immediate, unvarnished truth. It wasn't a question, it was a demand, a thunderclap of fury barely contained, promising retribution. "I had the baby," Elena blurted out, the words tumbling from her in a desperate rush, urgent and raw, a torrent of confession. "She's here. I'm at Mercy Hospital." The details, stark and unembellished, were all she could offer, a lifeline thrown across a chasm of despair, hoping it would be enough. A long pause followed, heavy with unspoken questions, with calculations being made, with a world shifting on its axis. Elena could almost hear the gears turning in his formidable mind, the ruthless efficiency with which he processed information, assessed threats. Then, a single, sharp intake of breath, a sound that spoke volumes of suppressed rage and dawning realization. The voice that returned was colder, sharper, more cutting than anything she had ever heard from him, devoid of any warmth, any recognizable emotion beyond a chilling, absolute resolve. "Stay put!" The words were clipped, precise, an order that brooked no argument, leaving no room for hesitation. A beat laden with unspoken threat, a promise of swift, inevitable action. "I'm coming." The line went dead with a definitive click, the abrupt silence more jarring than any shout could have been, leaving Elena alone with the echoes of his final, chilling words. Elena lowered the phone slowly, her arm feeling heavy, numb, as if it had borne an impossible weight, the cheap plastic now warm from her grasp. Her free hand, almost instinctively, went to Hope's small, downy head, stroking her hair with a tenderness that defied the tumult raging inside her. A single tear, hot and stinging, traced a path down her cheek, leaving a burning trail of relief and exhaustion. It wasn't a tear of sadness, not entirely. It was relief, acid and overwhelming, a tidal wave that washed over her, threatening to drown her in its intensity, a sudden, dizzying lightness after endless months of strain. She was not alone. She had called upon the one person she swore she never would, the one man whose help came with an undeniable, unpayable cost, and he had answered. The implications of that answer, the debt she knew she would eventually pay, were for another time. For now, there was only the fragile comfort of shared burden, a temporary reprieve. A new chapter, she knew, was about to begin, one she had tried desperately to avoid, but which now seemed unavoidable, almost fated. The corridor outside the room, previously hushed and still, now offered a subtle shift in the oppressive quiet. A soft scuff of shoes against the linoleum, a deliberate, measured sound. Footsteps, slow and rhythmic, approached, growing steadily louder, closer, until they stopped just outside her door. Each step was a measured beat against the silence, drawing closer, closer, until they stopped just outside her door. Elena's breath hitched in her throat, her entire body tensing, every nerve alive with anticipation, a prickle of fear mingling with a strange sense of inevitability. The faint, metallic click of the latch echoed unnaturally loud in the room, a small sound with immense gravity. Then, with an almost agonizing slowness that stretched the seconds into an eternity, the door handle began to turn, a dark, gleaming arc against the pale wood, signaling the arrival of her past, her protector, her patriarch. The air in the room seemed to shift, heavy with the weight of his presence and the unspoken history between them. The door swung inward with a soft hydraulic sigh, a sound too smooth, too expensive for a hospital. The man who stood there did not fill the doorway so much as command it, the very space rearranging itself around his stillness. He was tall, impeccably tailored in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the dim fluorescent light, its fine wool whispering of old money and quiet power as he moved. He was not a man of overt force, but of an immense gravitational presence. His hair was a close-cropped, distinguished silver, his features sharp and intelligent, his dark skin holding the faint, pleasant scent of cedar and expensive leather, a bespoke fragrance that sliced through the room's sterile, antiseptic pall. This was Arthur Dubois. His gaze went first to the woman in the bed, his daughter. The harsh hospital lighting leached the color from her face, leaving dark, bruised-looking hollows under her eyes. An IV tube snaked from her arm, a thin, cruel tether. For a fraction of a second, the iron control of his expression fractured, a flicker of profound, gut-wrenching pain in his eyes. This was his child, broken. Then he saw the small, tightly wrapped bundle in her arms. He moved toward the bed, his custom-made shoes silent on the polished linoleum. He did not rush. He did not offer the empty, meaningless words of comfort that lesser men dispense like loose change. He simply placed a large, warm hand on Elena's shoulder, a gesture of immense weight, of finality. His gaze fell upon the sleeping face of his granddaughter, his first grandchild. He noted the tiny, perfect Cupid's bow of her lips, the faint dusting of dark hair on her head. The stillness in him deepened, transforming from authority into something akin to reverence. "Hope," Elena whispered, her voice raw and cracked, the single word a prayer she hadn't dared to believe in until now. "I didn't know who else to call. He threatened." Arthur nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement that acknowledged her pain and dismissed her fear simultaneously. He looked from the impossibly small face of the baby back to Elena's, his eyes now cleared of all emotion, save a cold, bottomless resolve. The reunion was over. The war had begun. He withdrew a sleek, impossibly thin phone from his inner pocket. He tapped the screen once with his thumb. It rang, a single, clipped tone. He did not wait for a greeting. "Activate it!" A pause stretched, filled only by the quiet hum of the heart monitor beside the bed. Elena's own heart hammered against her ribs. "Activate what?" "Inform the board an emergency meeting is called for 6 in the morning. The subject is the immediate termination and legal prosecution of Mr. Thorne." Another pause, shorter this time, as if the person on the other end knew better than to question the command. His voice was a low, calm instrument of destruction. A beat of silent resolve passed. Liquidate his entire portfolio, every share, every option, every fund. Use the Executive Override Clause. Section 7, Subsection B, the Morality Statute. He listened for a moment, his expression unreadable stone. "I am aware of the market implications. It doesn't matter. Yes, all of it. Now." He disconnected, placing the phone face down on the bedside table with a soft, deliberate click. The silence that followed was more potent, more terrifying than any shout. It was the silence of gears turning, of a global empire shifting its colossal weight to crush a single, arrogant man. Elena watched him, her hand resting protectively on Hope's tiny, blanket-wrapped body. The fear that had been her constant companion for months was receding, replaced by a terrifying, awesome sense of inevitability. She had not called the cavalry. She had unleashed a leviathan. The door opened again. This time, it was not silent. It was pushed open with an arrogant shove that made it bang against the stopper. Marcus Thorne strode in, a vision of dark, tailored victory. His suit was Italian, razor sharp, his shoes gleaming with a fresh, ostentatious shine. A confident, predatory smile played on his lips. He was expecting to find Elena alone, broken, and ready to beg. He saw her, pale and small in the oversized hospital bed, and then his eyes fell upon the older man standing beside her with an air of quiet possession. He did not recognize him. "Well, well," Marcus began, his voice a rich, gloating baritone that filled the room, deliberately loud and invasive. He spoke twice as much, a torrent of words to drown her silence. "I must say, Elena, I'm disappointed. I expected more tears, more pleading. Instead, you've already found a replacement, so this is the cavalry you've called? Some local, ambulance-chasing attorney smelling a payday?" He gave Arthur a dismissive head-to-toe glance, his lip curling slightly at the conservative cut of his suit. "Hello, Grandpa." He laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any real humor. He walked further into the room, circling the foot of the bed like a shark assessing its prey. He stopped near the window, the distant, glittering lights of the Miami skyline framing him in a dark halo. "You don't seem to understand the position you're in, my dear. You have nothing. The penthouse is being fumigated as we speak, metaphorically speaking, of course. Your credit cards are now beautifully embossed, decorative pieces of plastic. The joint accounts are frozen, soon to be consolidated under my sole ownership. Everything you thought was yours was merely a perk of being my wife, a position that is now, shall we say, redundant." He gestured dismissively at Arthur. "Whatever this man has promised you, it's a fantasy. I hold all the cards. I have the best legal team in the state, and they are already drafting the paperwork. Custody will be a formality. That child," he pointed a manicured finger at Hope, "is my legacy. She will be a Thorne, and she will be raised with strength, ambition, and a proper understanding of power." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a low, insistent hum. He ignored it. "I will not have my child raised by a weak woman. You are too sentimental, too emotional. You made your choice when you walked out. Now, you will live with it. Or, more accurately, you will live without it. Without her." Elena's chin came up, a spark of her father's fire in her eyes. Her hand never left her baby. "You are a monster." Marcus smiled, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. "I am a winner. It's the same thing in this world, something your sheltered, pathetic life never taught you." His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time, a frantic, vibrating pulse against his hip. Annoyed, he pulled it out. The screen showed a private number. He answered with a clipped, impatient bark. "Thorne." He listened. His confident posture stiffened, a subtle tightening in his shoulders. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of irritated disbelief. "What do you mean, a margin call? On what?" That's impossible. My portfolio is solid rock." He listened again, his face clouding with a mixture of confusion and fury, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. "What do you mean, liquidated? Liquidated by whom? Who the hell authorized it? No, that's not possible. There must be a mistake. Find out who made this error and you fire them. Do you hear me?" He ended the call, his thumb jabbing savagely at the screen. He stared at the phone as if it had physically betrayed him. A frantic, crackling energy began to radiate from him. "A clerical error!" he muttered. To the room, to himself. "Some idiot in the back office is about to be unemployed." Another call came through almost immediately. This one was from his office. He put it on speaker, a desperate, angry move to reassert control, to prove this was all a minor hiccup. "Camille, what is it? I'm busy." Camille's voice, usually a seductive, calculated purr, was a high-pitched, panicked squeak. The frantic jangle of her expensive bracelets clattered in the background. "Marcus, what did you do?" "The board. They called an emergency meeting for 6 in the morning. They're talking about a morality clause. The Dubois Morality Statute, Marcus, Section 7. My access has been revoked. I'm locked out of the system. The entire Thorn portfolio is flashing red. It's gone. What is going on?" Marcus's face went pale, a sickly, chalky white under the fluorescent lights. He snapped the speakerphone off, the silence rushing back in. He looked from his phone to Elena, and finally to the silent man who had not moved an inch. For the first time, he seemed to see him. He saw the cut of the suit that cost more than his car. He saw the unnerving, absolute calm in the face of financial Armageddon. He saw the power that didn't need to speak. A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced his monumental arrogance. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his voice losing its smooth baritone, taking on a raw, ragged edge. A sudden, cold realization began to dawn. Arthur Dubois met his gaze. The air in the room grew cold, heavy. "You work for the Dubois Hospitality Group, Mr. Thorn?" Marcus let out a shaky, incredulous laugh, a sound thin and brittle. "I don't just work for them. I run the Miami flagship. I am the face of this brand in the most important market in the country. I took a failing hotel and made it a global destination. I am the reason." Arthur took a single, deliberate step forward, a predator closing a distance that had already been psychologically erased. "My name is Arthur Dubois." The words hung in the air, simple and definitive. "You're lying," Marcus whispered, the words barely audible. He looked desperately for a sign of deception. Arthur's eyes were chips of black ice. He delivered the final, killing blow with the same quiet calm he'd used to order a man's ruin. "Dubois Hospitality is mine." Arthur's gaze was unwavering. The phone in Marcus's hand slipped from his numb fingers. It didn't fall so much as surrender, clattering onto the floor with a cheap, plastic sound that echoed the hollowness of his own achievements. The color drained completely from his face, leaving behind a waxy gray mask of pure horror. He looked at Elena, truly looked at her for the first time since he had entered the room, and he finally saw not the weak woman he had tried to create, but the bloodline she carried, the heir. The one variable he had never, in all his meticulous, arrogant planning, ever considered. His empire was a house of cards built on another man's mountain. His ambition, a fatal miscalculation. His victory, a ghost. He stood in the wreckage of his own making, the architect of his own annihilation, his reflection, a pale, broken stranger in the dark hospital window. The ground was gone. The lobby of the Grand Riviera Hotel was a tomb of polished marble, vast and echoing. The air, chilled to an unnatural coldness by an overzealous climate control system, felt like a physical presence against the skin, raising goosebumps. It carried the cloying scent of lilies, now stale and sickly sweet. Afternoon sun slanted through the towering glass facade, striping the floor with bars of liquid gold. Within those brilliant stripes, dust motes danced in the frozen air, a galaxy of tiny, insignificant particles caught in the spotlight of a dying day. The remaining board members of the Dubois Hospitality Group sat scattered on minimalist sofas, their postures rigid, their faces grim, masks of neutrality. They were vultures circling a carcass, their dark suits a funereal plumage. They avoided looking at each other, some staring at the shimmering dust, others at their own manicured hands, all of them waiting to see who would fall. At the center of this vast, cold space, Marcus Thorne stood alone. He wore a dark, impeccable suit, a bulwark of expensive fabric he had always used to armor himself against the world. But the fabric was beginning to fray at the edges of his composure. A single bead of sweat traced a slow, deliberate path from his temple down his jaw, a tiny betrayal he could not wipe away without showing weakness. He flicked his gaze from the averted eyes of the board members to the silent man who commanded the room without raising his voice. Across from him stood Arthur Dubois, a pillar of quiet, immovable force. His stillness was a counterpoint to Marcus's barely suppressed agitation. Beside him, Elena was a vision in a cream-colored dress that flowed around her form like water, its soft fabric a stark contrast to the hard lines of the room. Her hair was pulled back from her face, clean and severe, leaving no shadows to hide in. Her chin was up. She met Marcus's gaze, her own eyes clear and shockingly steady. She had been here before, in a different kind of hell, broken and begging. Now she returned as the foundation upon which he, the great Marcus Thorne, would be broken. A slim, severe man in a gray suit, Elias, stood at Arthur's other side, his face impassive, holding a tablet that glowed with cold, blue-white light. And near the main entrance, standing at a respectful, observant distance, was David Lee, the bellhop, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable, a silent witness to both the beginning and the end. "This is a farce," Marcus began, his voice a resonant boom that tried and failed to fill the void. It rolled through the lobby, echoing slightly, a sound too large for the crushing quiet. He spoke to the board, but his eyes were fixed on Arthur. "You call an emergency meeting, interrupting business, costing us money, based on the hysterical ramblings of a scorned woman? My wife, my ex-wife, who is clearly unstable. I have given 15 years of my life, my blood and sweat, to this company. I took this hotel, this very building, from a 3-star afterthought nobody wanted, into the crown jewel of the entire Dubois portfolio. It is a palace I built with my bare hands. Occupancy is at 98%. Revenue is up 400%. We are the global standard for luxury. And you stand here, you who have profited from my work, ready to crucify me on the word of a woman who abandoned her marriage and her responsibilities." He took a step forward, a predator pacing a cage of his own making. He spread his hands, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "Look at this, the marble, the art, the reputation. Look at me. Look at what I have built." Then, look at her. A spoiled girl who ran from her own name, who wanted the lifestyle without the work, who couldn't handle the pressure of being a thorn. She comes crawling back with some fantasy about being mistreated, and you, a board of supposedly intelligent businessmen, entertain this circus? Arthur did not respond. The silence he offered was more damning than any argument. He simply gave a nearly imperceptible nod at Elias. "Mr. Thorne," Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, the sound cutting cleanly through the air. "On the evening of November 12th, you summarily evicted a guest from this hotel without due process, in violation of multiple city ordinances and company policies." Marcus laughed, a harsh, incredulous bark that was too loud, too sharp. "A guest? You mean my wife, who was trespassing in a suite I paid for? It was a domestic dispute, Elias. A private matter, something that has absolutely no bearing on this board or my position." "Was it?" Elias's finger tapped the tablet, the small click echoing in the stillness. "David Lee." Elias allowed the silence to build, then delivered his next line. David Lee stepped forward from the shadows near the entrance. He said nothing. His face remained a professional blank canvas. He simply held up his phone and turned it toward a large, wafer-thin screen that two technicians had erected near the check-in desk, a monstrous black mirror. He touched his screen. The lobby's silent tension was shattered by the video. It was raw, shaky, immediate. The sound was horribly clear. There was Elena, her face pale with shock and disbelief, her hand protectively on her pregnant belly. There was Marcus, his face a mask of contemptuous fury, his voice sharp and cruel, a weapon honed to inflict maximum damage. The words, his words from that night, echoed through the opulent space, each one a nail being hammered into his coffin. "Get out! You have nothing! That baby is mine, not yours!" The board members, who had been studying their shoes, now looked up, their eyes fixed on the screen, their neutral masks slipping into expressions of distaste and shock. The final, brutal image of her being physically pushed out into the lashing rain, her meager belongings thrown after her into a puddle, played out in high definition for the silent, judging eyes of the men he had once called his allies. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was filled with the ghost of his own cruelty. "A domestic dispute," Elias repeated, the words dripping with ice. He looked down at his tablet, the light from the screen illuminating the utter lack of pity on his face. "You then systematically drained all joint accounts, liquidated shared assets, and filed for sole custody of a child not yet born, citing your wife's emotional instabilities and financial destitution, a destitution you yourself engineered in the preceding 12 hours. "I was protecting my assets," Marcus's voice faltered, the boom shrinking to a defensive snap. He saw the stone-cold expressions on the faces of the board. His bluster was failing him. The wall of words was crumbling from a volatile and unpredictable "da." He turned his fury on Elena, his last resort. "You did this. You plotted this with him." His gaze shifted venomously to Arthur. "You think you can just walk in here after all these years and destroy me? I made this hotel. I am this hotel. Without me, this place crumbles back into the mediocrity you left it in. I am the asset. You need me." Elias cleared his throat, a small, dry, precise sound that cut through Marcus's tirade like a scalpel. "We have a transcript of a call you made to your legal team that same evening, Mr. Thorne. In it, you discussed your strategy for divorcing your wife." He read from the tablet, his voice a merciless monotone. "She has no family to speak of, no resources of her own. Bleed her dry. I want her to have nothing. I want her to be a non-entity." You then added, and I quote, Elias paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, a hangman tightening a noose. A chilling quiet descended upon the room. "You are not a factor." The words Marcus had used to dismiss Elena, to erase her from his life, now read aloud in this cold, formal tribunal as his own indictment. A strangled sound, a gasp mixed with a sob, came from near the edge of the assembly. Camille Jenkins, a slash of defiant red silk in a sea of muted funereal tones, took a clumsy step forward. Her gold-plated jewelry jangled, a loud, nervous, cheap sound in the crushing quiet. Panic was etched on her face, a frantic, ugly thing replacing the usual smug confidence. She saw her future, the penthouse, the credit cards, the status, evaporating with Marcus's. She had to act. "This is a lie," she screeched, her voice high and thin, cracking with desperation. "All of it! Elena is a vindictive shrew. She was always jealous of me, of what Marcus and I have. He was going to leave her for me anyway." Camille's voice was sharp with panic. "We were going to build a life together," she cried, her hand going to her own stomach in a grotesque parody of Elena's protective gesture from the video. "A real family! I'm pregnant, Marcus. I'm having his baby!" The board members stirred, a ripple of fresh complication. "Another child!" Another claim on the Thorne, now Dubois, assets. Marcus stared at her, a flicker of something. Hope? Confusion? In his wild eyes. Could this be a lifeline? A way to change the narrative? Elias looked up from his tablet, his expression utterly unchanged by the melodrama. "You are not pregnant, Miss Jenkins." "Yes, I am," Camille insisted, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I have proof. I have the ultrasound. I have it right here." She fumbled in her purse. "Yes, you do," Elias said calmly, his voice a flat counterpoint to her shrieking. "You purchased it from a novelty website, gotchaprank.com, 3 weeks ago. We have the receipt." He made a small, precise gesture. A beat of damning evidence passed. "Miss Jenkins," the man said, his voice regretful but firm. He was older, with a kind, weary face and the unmistakable bearing of old money and deep disappointment. "Camille." Camille's face drained of all color, leaving a pasty white canvas under her garish makeup. "Uncle Charles, no!" "You have brought shame upon our family name with your avarice and your deceit," he said, his voice resonating with a sorrowful authority that filled the lobby more completely than Marcus's shouting ever had. "This is not what your grandmother would have wanted. You are no longer welcome in my home. You are no longer my niece. We are done." He paused, his words delivering a crushing blow. He turned his back on her with excruciating finality and sat down. A low, wounded sound escaped Camille's lips. She stumbled back, catching her heel on the edge of an expensive rug, and fell into a heap of red silk and cheap, clattering gold. He was a broken doll, discarded, Her own lie, her own greed, had severed her last connection to a respectable life. All eyes, briefly diverted, turned back to Marcus. His lifeline was gone, his co-conspirator was exposed and humiliated. His fortress had been reduced to rubble, and he was standing in the middle of it. The sweat was flowing freely now, soaking the collar of his expensive shirt, pasting it to his skin. The dark suit suddenly looked like a shroud. He stared at Elena, at the calm, quiet woman in cream who had endured his rage and his greed without a word. He saw the subtle curve of her stomach, no longer swollen with pregnancy but still carrying the memory of the life within, a life he had tried to claim and control as he would a stock portfolio. He looked at Arthur, the patriarch whose mere existence upended his entire world. The board members looked away from him now, their gazes dropping to their laps, their phones anywhere but at the face of the man they had once toasted as a kingmaker. His humiliation was complete. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies, now stale and sickly sweet. The only sound was the distant, indifferent hum of the hotel's climate control system, turning on as it always did. Marcus Thorne, the winner, the titan, the master of his universe, was finished. He had built his empire on another man's mountain, and the mountain had just shrugged. In the profound silence that followed the complete and utter annihilation of a man's life, Elena's hand, which had been resting on her belly, fell to her side. Her chin, which had been held high and steady throughout, lifted a fraction more. She had watched him be stripped of his power, his money, his reputation. She had listened as his crimes were laid bare. She had not flinched. Now it was over. Elena stood. The air in the grand marble lobby, normally a crisp, scentless embrace of luxury, now hung thick and heavy, saturated with the cloying sweetness of the enormous lily arrangements near the polished brass elevators and the far more pungent, metallic tang of Marcus Thorne's fear. It clung to the air like an unwelcome shroud, an invisible, acrid cloud emanating from his pores. He stood as if carved from defeat, his usually imposing figure now stooped, slick with a fine sheen of cold perspiration that seeped through the tailored wool of his expensive suit. The dark fabric, once a symbol of his unwavering power and impeccable taste, now clung to him like a damp, suffocating second skin, a tangible representation of his unraveling. His gaze, wild and unfocused, swept across the vast expanse of the lobby. The gleaming white and gray-veined marble floors, usually reflecting the opulent chandeliers in a dance of light, now seemed to mock him, stretching into an endless, cold abyss. The towering, fluted columns, usually symbols of architectural strength, felt like bars of a gilded cage. He saw no comfort in the plush velvet seating arrangements, no ally in the impassive faces of the few remaining hotel staff, their movements hushed and distant, like figures in a dream. The lobby, once his stage, his domain where he orchestrated deals with a casual wave of his hand, had become his inescapable prison. The hum of the climate control system, usually an unnoticed whisper, now sounded like a low, ominous growl in his ears. Arthur Dubois stepped forward, his approach deliberate, each footfall a soft but resonant thud on the marble. His movements were precise, economical, every motion weighted with an inherent, unshakable authority. He didn't stride, he advanced, a force of nature, a rock, solid and unwavering, preparing to meet a breaking wave. The soft glow of the recessed lighting caught the silver threads in his immaculately combed hair, giving him an almost ethereal, yet utterly commanding presence. Beside him, Elias adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with a quiet, almost imperceptible whisper of movement, the subtle click of the frame, the only sound breaking the building tension. From the vast, arched main entrance, David Lee watched, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. His presence was a silent, unyielding judgment, his eyes, dark and sharp, fixed solely on Marcus. "Marcus Thorne." Arthur's voice was a low, resonant baritone, rich with a deep, unwavering finality that vibrated in the very air. It was a drumbeat, slow and deliberate, marking the end. A heavy silence settled in the room. "Effective immediately, your employment with Dubois Hospitality Group is terminated." Arthur paused, allowing the words to sink in, his gaze unwavering, almost clinically detached. "Your shares, both vested and unvested, are hereby forfeited. Your severance package, null and void. Your executive residence on Biscayne Boulevard has been repossessed, the keys having already been secured. Furthermore, all corporate assets currently held under your name are now frozen, pending a comprehensive audit of your activities." Marcus recoiled as if physically struck, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat before he found his voice. It was raw, strangled, barely a whisper of its usual commanding tone. You cannot do this!" His gaze, frantic, darted to the silent board members scattered among the plush seating, a desperate, animalistic appeal. He struggled for words. "I built this! I am this company!" "This is a coup!" he shrieked, the words echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly vast space. Arthur gave a fractional shake of his head, a gesture of mild disdain rather than genuine denial. His lips barely thinned. "This is not a coup, Marcus. This is a correction, a reclamation." His voice remained eerily calm, cutting through Marcus's hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. He then turned his head slightly towards Elias, a subtle shift that carried immense weight. A chilling quiet filled the space. "Elias," he said, the name a soft command, "the legal team will proceed with charges of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty." Elias gave a crisp nod, a silent confirmation. Arthur turned back to Marcus, his eyes now holding a steely glint. "Given the irrefutable evidence presented to the board this morning, we anticipate a swift and decisive prosecution." Marcus's chest hitched, a sharp, audible gasp for air that seemed to catch in his constricted throat. He opened his mouth, but no sound, no coherent thought managed to escape. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, each word from Arthur a hammer blow. The blood drained from his face with sickening speed, leaving it ashen, gaunt, his features suddenly hollowed and ancient. He felt a phantom chill, not from the efficient air conditioning of the luxury hotel, but a cold that seeped deep into his bones, a profound internal freeze that mirrored the sudden, icy despair in his soul. His hands began to tremble almost imperceptibly at his sides. He had always been a step ahead, always had an angle, a contingency, a perfectly crafted countermove. Now, as the implications of Arthur's words fully registered, the path ahead was not just dark, it was non-existent. A suffocating dread settled over him, heavier than any physical weight. Elias, without a single spoken word, merely lifted his hand and gestured subtly towards the main entrance of the lobby. It was a silent, almost imperceptible command, yet its meaning was instantly clear. The large, revolving glass doors parted smoothly, revealing two figures, tall and imposing, silhouetted against the bright Miami morning. They were uniformed, their stances stern, exuding an undeniable aura of authority. Miami-Dade Police. Their presence was a cold, hard promise, a tangible manifestation of the nightmare unfolding around Marcus. The faint, rhythmic clink of their equipment, the soft rasp of a utility belt, the metallic brush of a radial against fabric grew louder with each measured step they took across the gleaming marble. Ah! A death knell tolling for Marcus's freedom. Marcus stared at them, his eyes wide, now filled with a sudden, sickening realization that curdled in his stomach. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled back a step, disoriented, his heel catching on the thick, plush velvet rope that delineated a VIP area. The rope swayed precariously, then settled, but the sensation of being trapped, cornered, was absolute. His chest heaved, each breath a struggle against the invisible weight pressing down on him. His meticulously planned life had always accounted for every contingency, every counter move. But this was not in his playbook. He had no defense against the unforgiving reality now bearing down on him. His mind raced, desperate for an escape, a loophole, anything, but found only blank, echoing panic. His gaze, desperate and pleading, finally landed on Elena, the woman he had so casually dismissed, whose intelligence and strength he had so cruelly underestimated. His eyes were no longer contemptuous, no longer dismissive, but nakedly, painfully desperate, silently begging for what? For mercy? For intervention? For recognition of the man he once was? Elena met his gaze, her expression unreadable, calm amidst the swirling chaos. Her cream-colored dress, a simple but elegant silk, was a soft counterpoint to the sharp, unforgiving lines of the marble lobby and the dark, crumpled suit of Marcus. Her chin remained high, her posture erect, a beacon of serene resolve. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of lilies and cold fear filling her lungs, yet not touching her composure. Hope, the name she had given her daughter, resonated within her, a silent mantra, a source of unwavering strength. "You are not a factor." Elena's voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion, yet it cut through the heavy silence of the lobby with the sharpness of glass. A wave of profound finality washed over the room. It struck Marcus harder than any physical blow, harder than any punch or accusation. The words were his own, a phrase he had wielded to dismiss rivals, diminish employees, assert dominance. His weapon turned against him with devastating precision. He recoiled as if physically slapped across the face, the sheer bitter irony of it filling his mouth like poison. He staggered, a pathetic, broken figure, his knees threatening to give way. The last vestiges of his formidable arrogance evaporated, leaving only a hollow shell. The two Miami-Dade officers reached him then. The burly man, whose face held an unexpected kindness in his eyes, despite the stern set of his jaw, placed a hand, surprisingly gentle, on Marcus's arm. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice deep but not unkind, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Marcus flinched from the touch, his skin crawling. His once crisp dark suit crumpled further as his shoulders slumped, the expensive fabric bunching awkwardly around his defeated frame. He muttered something, a barely audible whisper, lost in the vast, echoing space of the lobby. This cannot be happening. His denial was futile, weak, a dying ember against a raging storm. The other officer, a woman with sharp, observant eyes, began to read him his rights, her voice a flat, official drone that stripped all humanity from the moment. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his former life. The cold, unyielding steel of handcuffs clicked, the sound stark, undeniable, amplified in the cavernous room. It echoed, a final, public humiliation, sealing his fate. Marcus Thorne, once the undisputed master of this grand domain, now stood a prisoner. His hands, which had signed millions, orchestrated corporate empires, and wielded immense power, were now bound, rendered utterly powerless. He was led away, his footsteps heavy, dragging across the polished marble floor, each scrape a testament to his collapse. His head remained bowed, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the stone, as if searching for an answer there, or perhaps just trying to avoid the searing judgment of the world. The board members watched him go, their faces impassive once more, their earlier flicker of emotion extinguished. They were already calculating new futures, new alliances, their minds shifting like quicksilver, adapting to the altered landscape. Camille, who had collapsed into a heap of crimson velvet on a nearby sofa, still watched him disappear, a small, broken whimper escaping her lips, a sound of raw, unvarnished fear and loss. Arthur turned, his sharp gaze finding Elena. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a fleeting ghost of an emotion, gone as quickly as it appeared. He extended his arms slightly, a gesture of quiet expectation. A nurse who had been waiting patiently near a discreet service entrance, her presence almost invisible until now, stepped forward. In her arms, cradled gently, was a small white bundle. Hope. Elena reached for her, her hands trembling slightly, a tremor of profound emotion that she made no attempt to conceal. The baby was warm, incredibly soft, a perfect, delicate weight in her arms. Scent of new baby, a unique, intoxicating blend of milk, sweet innocence, and the faint earthy notes of vernix replaced the lingering smell of fear and lilies. It was a clean, pure aroma that promised new beginnings. Elena held Hope close, her cheek pressing against the soft, downy hair on the baby's head. The small, rhythmic breaths against her chest were not just breaths, they were life itself, a symphony of renewal. The future, once fraught with uncertainty, once clouded by the shadow of Marcus's malevolence, now stretched before her, clear and open, illuminated by the pure light of hope. She looked around the grand lobby, the space no longer a tomb of past betrayals, but transformed into a vibrant stage for a new beginning. Her steps, as she turned to leave, were light, purposeful, imbued with a quiet strength that resonated with the promise of tomorrow. Elena, with hope held safe and warm against her heart, walked forward toward the unfolding dawn. Justice was done. You done.